Allison Grant stood in the lobby of the Bayview, the seaside hotel she had managed for over a decade, watching the early evening sun set over the water. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, a moment of quiet in her otherwise bustling day. At 36, she had built a life she was proud of: successful career, stable friendships, and a serene, if solitary, personal life. She didn't need more, or so she told herself, until Blake entered her world. Blake Reynolds had been a guest at the hotel for several weeks, his extended stay sparking curiosity among the staff. Tall, well-dressed, and exuding a casual charm that drew attention. Blake was a self-made man, or so the rumors went, a wealthy cryptocurrency investor who was supposedly taking time off after a particularly lucrative deal. Allison, however, had never engaged him beyond polite exchanges, remaining professionally detached. That changed one evening when Blake approached the front desk, asking for assistance with a technical issue in his room. "Ms. Grant, I've been having trouble with the internet in my suite," he said, a warm smile lighting up his sharp features. His deep voice carried a hint of something elusive, like someone used to getting what he wanted. "Let me take care of that for you," Allison responded, her manager's instinct kicking in. She sent for the technician, but Blake lingered. "So, what do you do when you're not running one of the finest hotels on the coast?" Blake asked casually, leaning against the desk. Allison paused. She rarely talked about herself with guests. "I manage the hotel. That takes up most of my time." Blake's smile widened. "You should allow yourself some downtime, Ms. Grant. A woman like you deserves to enjoy life beyond work." Allison felt a shift in the air between them. She couldn't deny the subtle pull, the allure of this enigmatic man. Over the following weeks, their interactions became more frequent. Blake would seek her out in the mornings, over coffee in the hotel's restaurant, or after hours, asking about her opinions on books, films, and philosophy. His interest felt genuine, and Allison found herself relaxing in his company, letting the layers of her professional guard fall. What began as innocent conversation soon grew into something deeper. Blake's life, filled with high-stakes financial deals and lavish travels, intrigued her. In turn, Allison's grounded approach to life seemed to fascinate him. He began inviting her out for dinners, subtle but unmistakable steps towards something more than friendship. Though Allison was cautious, her instincts warning her of the dangers of mixing personal life with business, Blake's charm was undeniable. He had a way of making her feel seen in a way she hadn't been in years. It wasn't long before the spark ignited into a full-blown romance. Despite Blake's wealth, he wasn't flashy. He valued privacy and discretion, two things that Allison found attractive. But there was something else too, an edge, a sense that Blake wasn't as open as he seemed. He never spoke of family or past relationships, and though he professed his love for Allison, he avoided any talk of commitment. "Marriage isn't for me," he said one night, lying next to her in bed, his voice soft but firm. "I've seen too many people lose themselves in it." Allison had nodded, accepting his words, even though they stung. She had always dreamed of a family, a stable future with someone she loved, but with Blake, she wasn't sure where they were headed. Still, she couldn't bring herself to walk away. Their relationship continued like this for over a year, a mixture of passion and uncertainty, until one day Blake surprised her. "Let's get married," he said, over a quiet dinner at her favorite restaurant, his eyes scanning her face for a reaction. Allison blinked, taken aback. "You want to get married?" He nodded, a small, almost nervous smile playing on his lips. "I've thought about it a lot. You've changed me, Allison. I can't imagine my life without you." Despite her initial shock, happiness flooded her. She said yes, and they began planning a wedding, lavish, luxurious, and everything Allison had ever dreamed of. She didn't mind financing most of it. After all, Blake had always been generous in other ways, and money was never an issue for her. But as they planned the ceremony, her happiness was tinged with an odd unease she couldn't quite shake. Allison was in the middle of a hectic day at the hotel when her sister Amy showed up unannounced. Amy had always been the free spirit of the family, 5 years younger, and with a wild streak that Allison both admired and worried about. She hadn't heard from Amy in months, which wasn't unusual. Her sister had a habit of disappearing for long stretches, only to resurface when she needed help. "Allison." Amy's voice rang out as she breezed into the office, her dark curls bouncing and her smile as bright as ever. "Amy," Allison greeted her warmly, though she couldn't help but feel a slight tension at her sister's sudden arrival. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see my big sis, of course," Amy replied, plopping down in the chair opposite her. "And to hear all about this big wedding you're planning. You're marrying a millionaire, a lie. How did you pull that off?" Allison laughed, brushing off the teasing. "Blake's amazing. It just sort of happened." Amy's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Well, I hope you're ready for the wild ride. Guys like Blake don't come around every day." There was something in Amy's tone that gave Allison pause, but she pushed the thought away. Her sister had always been a bit cynical about relationships, never sticking with anyone for long. Allison chalked it up to Amy's usual attitude and moved on, updating her sister on the wedding plans. Over the next few weeks, Amy started spending more time around the hotel. At first, Allison was glad to have her sister involved. She even asked Amy to be her maid of honor, thrilled that they were reconnecting. But there were moments when she noticed strange glances between Amy and Blake, fleeting touches that seemed too familiar. Allison tried to dismiss her growing suspicions, telling herself she was being paranoid. Blake loved her, and Amy was her sister. They would never betray her. But the gnawing feeling persisted, and one day, unable to shake it any longer, Allison did something she had never done before. She went through Blake's phone. Allison's hands shook as she scrolled through Blake's messages. She had told herself she wouldn't find anything, that she was just being paranoid. But the truth was right there on the screen, undeniable. "Amy, I can't wait until we can finally be together without sneaking around. Blake, soon. Just a little longer." Her heart raced as she read through the texts, the betrayal sinking in like a dagger. It wasn't just an affair, Amy was pregnant. The words leapt off the screen, cutting deeper than anything Allison could have imagined. "Amy, I think we need to tell her before the wedding. I can't hide this much longer." "Blake, not yet. Let her go through with it. We'll take the money and leave after." Allison dropped the phone, a cold numbness overtaking her. The man she loved, the man she was planning to marry, had been conspiring with her own sister to steal from her. She felt sick, her entire world unraveling in a matter of minutes. For a long moment she stood frozen, disbelief battling with rage. How could they? The two people closest to her in the world had been planning to betray her in the worst way possible. And Amy was carrying Blake's child. Allison couldn't breathe. The room seemed to spin, and she stumbled toward the bathroom, where she collapsed to the floor, her chest heaving with sobs. When the tears finally stopped, something else settled inside her, something cold and hard. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, but for Allison, it felt like a cruel joke. She stood in her bridal suite, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The dress was perfect lace and satin, elegant and timeless, but she felt nothing as she smoothed her hands over the fabric. This day was supposed to be the happiest of her life, but now it was all a farce. Allison knew she had a choice: call off the wedding and confront Blake and Amy, or go through with it and expose them in the most public, humiliating way possible. The rage inside her seethed like a barely contained storm, but she also felt something else: control. If she canceled now, she would lose. She would be the victim, blindsided and humiliated. But if she played her cards right, they would be the ones destroyed. Her decision was made. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Allison moved through the wedding preparations with an eerie calm. She greeted the guests, oversaw the final details, and slipped into her gown with the help of her bridesmaids. No one, not even Amy, seemed to notice anything was amiss. Amy had arrived earlier that morning, glowing with excitement, or perhaps it was guilt. Allison thought bitterly. "You look beautiful," Amy said, adjusting the veil on Allison's head. Allison caught her sister's eyes in the mirror, searching for a crack in her facade. But Amy smiled brightly, her voice light and carefree. It was astonishing how easily she could lie, how well she had hidden the affair right under Allison's nose. A wave of nausea swept through her, but she pushed it down, maintaining her own mask. "Thanks, Amy," Allison replied evenly, her voice devoid of warmth. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Amy seemed to take this as a compliment, laughing as she straightened her own dress. Allison's hand clenched into a fist at her side. Soon, everything would come crashing down, and Amy had no idea what was coming. The ceremony took place in the hotel's outdoor garden, a stunning backdrop of ocean and sky. Dozens of guests gathered, whispering about how lucky Allison was to have landed someone like Blake. Allison stood at the entrance, ready to walk down the aisle, her heart pounding with anticipation, not for the vows, but for what she knew would happen next. As the music swelled and she began her walk down the aisle, her eyes found Blake's. He stood at the altar, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, his expression one of adoration. But all Allison could see was the man who had deceived her, who had plotted with her own sister to ruin her. She felt her stomach twist in disgust as she approached him, but she kept her face serene. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking words of love and commitment that now felt hollow and meaningless. Allison barely heard any of it. Her mind was focused on the ticking clock, waiting for the moment to arrive. And then it did. Just as the officiant asked if anyone had reason to object to the union, there was a sudden commotion from the back of the garden. Allison's heart leaped into her throat as she saw Amy, red-faced and breathless, making her way toward the altar. It was exactly as she had expected. "Wait!" Amy cried out, her voice frantic. All eyes turned toward her as she stumbled forward, clutching her stomach. "I can't let this go on. I have to tell the truth." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Blake's face went pale. Allison stepped back, allowing Amy to take center stage, knowing the spectacle was about to reach its peak. "I'm pregnant," Amy blurted, her voice shaking with emotion. "Blake is the father." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Blake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Allison could see the panic in his eyes, the realization that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. She felt a cold satisfaction curl in her chest. The guests were whispering now, the perfect wedding descending into chaos. Allison stood still, watching the scene unfold as if it were happening to someone else. She had waited for this moment, the moment when Blake and Amy would destroy themselves, and she wouldn't have to lift a finger. But before anyone could fully process Amy's confession, there was another interruption. This one came from the back of the crowd, a figure that none of them had expected. A woman stepped forward, dressed in a simple black dress, her face drawn with anger and exhaustion. "You think this is bad?" she called out, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "You have no idea." The crowd parted as the woman made her way to the front, her eyes fixed on Blake with a venomous glare. Blake visibly recoiled, his face draining of color. Allison recognized the woman immediately. Blake had mentioned her once in passing, Angela, his estranged wife. "I'm still legally married to him," Angela announced, her voice rising as she addressed the stunned audience. "Blake's a bigamist, and he's not the millionaire you all think he is. He's broke. His cryptocurrency investments tanked months ago, and he's been living off loans and lies ever since." The air around Allison seemed to freeze. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She had known Blake was a liar, a cheater, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Blake's parents, sitting in the front row, looked horrified, his mother covering her mouth in disbelief. Allison's own parents, who had flown in for the wedding, stared at her in confusion, trying to make sense of the chaos. Blake turned toward Allison, his face a mask of desperation. "Allison, please, I can explain." "No," she said, her voice cold and steady. "You've said enough." Angela stepped closer, her voice sharp with fury. "You thought you could leave me and marry some other woman while I was still cleaning up your messes. You're a liar, Blake, a fraud. And now everyone knows it." Blake's shoulders sagged as he realized the extent of his ruin. The guests were standing now, some gathering their things, others whispering harshly as they glanced toward Allison with pity. But Allison felt no pity. She felt nothing but the icy calm of someone who had survived the worst and come out the other side. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind of legal action and fallout. Blake's parents, horrified by the revelations, disowned him publicly. His once prestigious family name was tarnished, and he quickly became the subject of tabloid stories. His financial ruin was laid bare, and both Allison and Angela filed lawsuits against him, Allison to recover the money she had spent on the wedding, Angela to finalize their long-delayed divorce and claim her share of his dwindling assets. Amy, despite everything, remained loyal to Blake. She refused to see reason, even as Allison begged her to reconsider her loyalty to a man who had betrayed them both. "Allison, you don't understand," Amy had pleaded during their last conversation. "Blake's been through so much. He's not perfect, but he loves me. And I love him. We're going to raise this baby together." "You're delusional," Allison had said, her voice raw with frustration. "He used both of us. He'll use you again the moment he gets the chance." But Amy wouldn't hear it. She left, taking her unborn child and the remnants of her dreams with her. Blake left town shortly after settling his legal debts, his reputation in tatters and his future uncertain. For a time, it seemed he had simply disappeared. Allison spent the months after the wedding rebuilding her life piece by piece. The betrayal had scarred her deeply, but she refused to let it define her. She threw herself into her work at the hotel, which had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where she could regain control over her life. Friends rallied around her, offering support, and gradually, Allison found herself moving past the pain. She even started dating again, cautiously allowing herself to hope that not all men were like Blake. She had also severed ties with Amy. It hadn't been easy, but the wounds were too deep, the trust too shattered. Amy had chosen her path, and Allison had chosen hers. Amy struggled after Blake left. She gave birth to a baby girl, naming her Violet, And despite her initial optimism, the reality of raising a child on her own hit hard. She reached out to Allison, hoping for reconciliation, but the door remained firmly closed. Allison wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. Amy found work where she could, relying on the kindness of others, but the life she had envisioned with Blake had evaporated. She had been left with nothing but her child, and while she loved Violet, the loneliness of her situation was undeniable. It was only after months of struggle that Amy finally came to terms with the truth. Blake had never loved her. He had used her, just as he had used Allison, and now it was too late to fix what had been broken. A year passed, and Allison found herself sitting by the window of her home, watching the waves crash against the shore. She had rebuilt her life, found peace, and even allowed herself to dream of a future that no longer included the betrayals of the past. One evening there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Amy standing there, Violet in her arms. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness," Amy said, her voice trembling, "but I don't know where else to turn." Allison stood there for a long moment, the weight of their shared past hanging in the air between them. But as she looked at her sister, at the child in her arms, something softened inside her. "Come in," Allison said quietly, stepping aside. And for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that, despite everything, forgiveness was possible. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, give it a thumbs up, hit the bell, and drop a comment. Your feedback is greatly appreciated.